I will open us with a word of prayer, and then I'll just do some brief introductions, and we'll start talking about how to be a successful men's facilitator. Thanks guys for joining us. I imagine a few others will jump in as well, but we try to be pretty prompt with these, make them just an hour. So I'll go ahead and pray. Lord, I thank you so much for Ken and Scott and just the tremendous commitment that they've shown to serve you by serving other men. I thank you for the others who are joining us tonight, want to be better equipped. Lord, the needs are so great for trauma healing, and we feel that so acutely for men. So I pray you'll bless our webinar tonight. I just pray our time will be really fruitful. I pray that each of these attenders will be encouraged. I pray they'll be emboldened. I pray that you will use what they hear tonight to better equip them. I pray you'll guide them in making application, that more and more men could experience the healing that they need and you desire. So please bless us this evening, Lord. In Christ's name, amen.
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 All right. Well, there were going to be 3 panelists, and we live in Portland, and Portland has, like so many cities, has had a whole lot of protests, not all peaceful. And Michael Steins is a veteran facilitator, and he's also he's law enforcement. So he's got to work like 12 days in a row with no breaks. So he won't be able to join us. He and I normally, we've facilitated a couple groups together. So I can certainly represent him, but Ken and Scott Frazier, upper left, and Ken Dial are veteran facilitators with a lot of experience, and they actually have, I think, more small group experience than I do, at least doing these groups. I've done several, but Ken, how many have you done, Ken?
I think it's 7.
That moves you into the veteran category for sure.
I think it's 7, and that's since beginning of 2017, when actually Scott and I trained together and started our first
Terrific.
group as co-leaders.
Terrific. And Scott, you've done several, as I
17,
recall.
Yeah, I'm a novice though compared to Ken. I needed to go off and do a little of my own counseling and some things while he was busy doing classes or doing facilitating.
Well, you both have a lot of wisdom, so I am delighted to have Scott and Ken share some of that wisdom with us tonight. And again, where it seems fitting, I'll jump in and share some things for Michael and my perspective, but these guys can definitely carry it. So Les and I put some questions together that these guys have seen, and we're going to utilize the questions, but we'll piggyback off of these and may add. And then as you're listening, definitely jot down questions you have. And we want to give you significant time, 15, 20 minutes toward the end, for you to personalize this, things that you've encountered, or if you haven't started yet, things that you're wondering about that maybe we didn't cover or didn't cover deeply enough. This is your opportunity. So, Ken and Scott, and these are not in any particular order. We just kind of jotted these down as we went. Certainly one of the bigger challenges for doing men's groups is we as men, we could argue the reasons for this, but there are lots of reasons. It seems hard for the vast majority of us to admit areas of weakness and struggle. Maybe I can't compare it to women because I don't have a women's brain, but I know for us that can kind of seem to go against our sense of masculinity. It can feel weak. So that can really be a challenge, I think, for us as facilitators and even in getting a group started. I mean, doing a group presumes that you've got some areas of woundedness that need to be addressed. Celesta talks about, her description is that women are body modest, much more than men. Men tend to be much more soul modest. I think that's, for most of us, pretty accurate. So let's just get started with that one. Ken and Scott, can you relate to that, and how have you seen that played out in your groups? And I'll add, in light of that, how do we even recruit men to do a group when, for most men, they don't want to admit that they've got some deep heart wounds?
That's a very good question, particularly for initiating a group and collecting a group of men together. I think the men that really need the groups can be desperate enough that they will do what they need to do to come to a group. I've tended to go by, you know, invitation, people that I know, yes, referrals from pastors, talk a little bit about it, but you know, it is, I agree, it's very difficult for us to start that process. But once that's fermenting away inside, I think, and it's ready to come out, I've noticed guys are ready to roll. They want to go, because this is the thing that they need most, is to get rid of that shell that they've put around themselves, and start to deal with the stuff that's ruining their lives.
Yeah.
So,
Scott, what do you think?
So I think, you know, women are body modest if they're in a good place, and men are soul modest if they're in a good place. When we're not, we're seeking that affirmation. We're out there, you know, looking for it in whatever, you know, from, you know, our dads when we're little and on, you know, whether it's some type of vice or something that affirmation. And I think as I talk, as far as having people join, as I talk about what it's done in my life, going through the material, and one is being a less controlling, demanding father, you know, is a clear benefit. Being a person who's comfortable getting up and speaking in front of people at work, that was one that I didn't expect. You know, there's and you start, when you look at the material and you look at where you find your value, it makes sense now, but for a while it was like, okay, I took mending the soul, and now I'm just comfortable standing up in front of people and presenting, and, you know, how does this work together? And you realize that you found your value. You have that affirmation from God the Father in a way that you didn't expect, and you're more comfortable. So
Yeah.
I think it's talking about, I haven't used the word soul modesty before, but it's that thing that sharing that with other men is appealing to them, and sharing, you know, how much it's done in my life, and there's a lot of different aspects.
I think that personal testimony is so key. That's so key. As I think of I think it was a third group that I was part of, I was facilitating. It was actually a group of pastors, 6 pastors, and all but one had never done a group. I mean, these are pastors, so they're busy, especially on Sundays. They committed close to 2 hours every Sunday afternoon. Sometimes I had to almost kick them out. It was absolutely phenomenal. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I think you guys will appreciate it. I've never heard as much swearing in a group in my life, but it wasn't gratuitous. And that was so funny because they're pastors. But here's my point, and it relates to that soul modesty, if you will. And they shared this, that it was the first time in their life they had really had the opportunity to just address things that they had kept hidden, that no one knew about. And I'm kind of piggybacking, Ken, off of what you said. It was once we got that ball rolling,
Right.
I mean, it was like the cork had been popped on the bottle. So I would pass that on in terms of starting a group. Yeah, it can be a little difficult in the recruiting, maybe especially for men compared to women. We're less likely to admit we have these needs, but I think I'm convinced that that very dynamic, because we men don't tend to, we don't tend to talk about personal things in general as much as our wives do, and certainly not hurts. I just don't think most of us are wired that way, but we have hurts. And so I think men in many respects we are more starved for, if I could use that word, for an opportunity
Yes.
to be in a safe environment where we can really talk and be real. And so that's the positive dynamic about the challenge. And yeah, to give, and Ken, you're right. When guys are ready and they're given the opportunity, they've probably never had an opportunity like this before. That can really
Yes.
be amazing.
That's been by experience. I think I only had one guy who in my groups that wasn't sharing, had trouble getting into it and digging into his own stuff. But that's, one out of, 15 or so, 20. I don't know how many I've had, but
Yeah.
yeah. I think we're more relational than we like to believe. I think men are much more relational than we would admit. We want that camaraderie with other men. We want to be accepted by other men.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of looked down on because we're supposed to be the strong silent type, but that's just a stereotype that isn't God's plan for us.
It doesn't serve us well. Well, go ahead, Scott.
That camaraderie, I think, is something that I searched for years in my life. That camaraderie with men, really close connection, being able to share everything, and I think I would say the groups, they're like a drug, but they're not the addictive drug. They're not the drug that you have to do it again and have to do it again. There's benefits, but it's more of the healing drug. Once you do go through it, you have a healing relationship vertically with God, and you don't require as much of that relationship. You're not as needy.
Oh, thank
That's
you.
what I found anyway.
Yeah. Well, the next kind of logical question would be, okay, it's pretty obvious that vulnerability and really sharing honestly is essential if a small group's going to be effective, because our wounds are some of the most personal things about us. So that takes a lot of vulnerability and a sense of safety. So how do you guys as facilitators create an environment? What kinds of things do you do so that, from day one, there is that sense of safety, for lack of a better word, and that what do you do to stimulate honesty, vulnerability, real sharing?
So I think one thing that I was surprised about at the beginning was as I was starting groups, I was looking at the paperwork side of it as something we just need to get through to get to the main stuff, to really get into the and so I'm trying to rush through the paperwork.
Yeah.
But as I went on in facilitating, it came up that they really appreciated that. That was actually it's a promise between men that this is going to be a safe place. This is going to be something different. And so now I would look at it differently as far as, don't skip that. Don't rush through it. Take the time you need to go through the forms, particularly the confidentiality agreement. Would probably be one of the main ones to make sure you walk through that. Everybody, everybody can see everybody's signed it and is good with that. That was definitely the first step, and then I think Ken and I would agree that the next thing is you jump into your story and you put your heart on the sleeve and just bear it and be an example of what it looks like to be transparent and thorough in for people's understanding, not necessarily thorough in abuse, that type of thing, but you don't have to go into details, but for men to see that that this is going to be raw, and for that example to be out there right at the beginning, I think the men just buckle up and say, okay, this is what we're doing. It's time to go.
Yeah, I agree with you, Scott. I agree that once the level that we share at in our stories, just telling them the deep stuff that we've been through, it sets the scene. It lets them know it's okay to talk about stuff at this sort of level. It's like, we don't know where we are at the beginning, but then as we go into the group, we get, and do that in the first session. It says, okay, we can share at this level. This is where we're heading.
Yeah.
There seems to be like, when you find out that there's someone else out in the world that has an experience like you, they instantly bond, because the belief is you're the only person on the whole planet that's ever had these horrific experiences.
Right.
And that's what Satan is constantly telling you. And then you find somebody that's, I know exactly what you're talking about. And once you get that bond created, it is a snowball. It's an avalanche.
I think that's a good way to describe it, because we don't tend to have this elsewhere. So when you finally find that environment where that's happening, you want that.
You do want it.
Yes.
There's this natural desire to want to tell someone, but who do you tell? Because most people, 99.9% of the people you tell are just going to look at you like, well, that sounds horrible. Too bad.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes even spouses aren't ready to hear it.
Right.
Yes.
So I think which one of you was that?
Yeah,
okay.
I did have some things to add. I totally agree with Scott about going over the paperwork at the beginning. I spent an hour on it maybe. I go into the details and explain how important it is and why why it's so necessary to address these things. And that's and then I also let them know from myself, you know, I tell them, not just with my story, but I say that it's okay. I validate any kind of response they might have. You mentioned the pastor swearing. I've had some in my groups too, but it's really important for us as facilitators not to be shocked by anything.
Yeah.
To have the attitude of God knows everything about what they've been through, and He knows how He's going to deal with it. I don't need to be concerned about the depth of anyone's trauma or the intensity of anyone's response, because God knows, and it's actually good for them to go through that. So I say up front, you can say anything you like, you can express any emotion you like. You can weep if you want to. You can move your hands and stuff. I mean, obviously within some constraints of not hurting anyone else in the group, but you know, it's saying that this is all okay, to be who you are and to let the stuff out, because it's only in letting the stuff out that the healing will come.
Yeah. I think the book of Job gives us a model for God allowing Job, after a trauma, to vent it to God. Yeah. Well, that's helpful. Kind of go a little bit different direction. What have you most enjoyed about facilitating men's groups?
Well, for me, I think that's easy. It's just seeing God at work, bringing wholeness into their lives. It's just the aha moments, the deepening fellowship between the steady growth and the depth of sharing, and just the way that you see things happen, you see men change. It's just wonderful. I wouldn't trade that for anything.
Yeah.
I right along the same lines. Just that understanding that comes of how the past has affected them, and the freedom, and understanding God's love for us, because I think that comes out very clearly in the curriculum. Just just how different things we've experienced have detracted from that, and so restoring that and seeing that aha, and that's that freedom, the joy, the relief from that is amazing.
Yeah, isn't it?
If I may backtrack a little bit onto the climate for making it comfortable, there was one other thing that I wanted to add, is that it's okay not to say anything. The guys need to know it's okay if they're not ready to say something, that they don't have to. And that's one of the things in the guidelines. And also that
no, I just turned it off.
Yeah, allowing silence is good.
Yeah.
Not being worried about silence, because that gives them time to think and come up with new stuff.
Right. Yeah, I think sometimes we feel, I don't know if it's just being a male thing or it's our Christian environment, but sometimes we feel like we've got to give an answer, we've got to give a solution, especially when there's a problem being expressed. And that's a good point, Ken. There's a time to just allow some silence, some time for some reflection. Yeah.
And this, it's well known, this, I think what they call a 30-second rule. If you're quiet for 30 seconds, someone will say something.
Yeah.
So, it's not going to go on forever, but it does give people time to reflect. And particularly as men can be internal processes and be, thinking about what they heard before they say the next thing. They need some space sometimes to do that. So that also makes it comfortable to say, it's okay if no one says anything for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if this question was on the list I gave you guys, but we need to ask it. What have you found to be one or two of the biggest challenges when facilitating men's groups, and how have you dealt with those?
I would say the biggest challenge is just keeping it a safe place, and that's I feel like my radar. That's the one thing I'm always trying to watch and be aware of is it a safe place, and it's really, you're creating a culture within the group. You're creating guidelines for how we communicate, for when someone is shared deeply, the right things to say are, wow, yeah, I really feel that, identifying with that pain and that type of thing. And sometimes, usually there's no jokes. I mean, people are pretty careful about that, not just like making light of things, but sometimes there can be like penetrating questions that that I've had to just ask. Does that feel like they're trying to guide you at this point, or are you comfortable with that question? And it's I think more often than not, so it's come back as, no, that's a fine question. They appreciate that question. So there's this balance between keeping it a really safe place and being too restrictive. And I think that the men understand that you're doing your job, you're guarding. So you can be right up front and say, hey, is that okay? Do we want to continue with that kind of question, or is that crossing the line and making you feel threatened or judged or something of that sort?
I love that point, Scott, because especially when it's your first time through, you're raw. Man, I was. Oh my goodness. Even though I'd written the book.
Yeah, it's funny to hear you say that.
I'd written the book, but there were still parts of my own abuse story that, honestly, there were parts I hadn't shared with Celesta because it was a long time ago, and it wasn't affecting me. Maybe some of you can relate to that.
Yeah. Nothing to fix here.
Yeah. And I was raw, and it was hard. So that safe environment was so important. And my first time through was actually before we had Many Soul curriculum. And I had a co-facilitator who wasn't particularly healthy and allowed dynamics that shouldn't have been. And man, that shut a lot of us down. So thank you, Scott, for reminding us that it is a balancing act, but that's part of the role of a big part of the facilitator's role is to create safety and at times jump in, not in a heavy-handed way. You described it really well. Just are you okay with that? You're saying this may be too much, but you're letting them decide. That's a great strategy for keeping things safe. Ken, you want to add anything?
Sorry, I just had myself on mute. I've had experience a bit too. I agree with Scott that you do have to keep an eye out, particularly for fixing, because we as men are such good fixers.
Yeah.
And a couple of times, I would have a little break in the middle of the group at an appropriate time, and I'd just take them aside privately and say, I think it seemed like you were treading close to fixing so-and-so's issue there, and just let them, respond to that. I think keeping on track too. I tend to be fairly free, flowing with the group, just following things where they go, allowing the spirit to move. But there are times when I say, okay, we got a little off track here, and we just have to get back to the main point. Then, I'll just ask something to say like, what did you get from this exercise? Or even just, hey, let's head back to the material. That was really good to talk about those things. And then just pick up with something there. You're very sort of casually to redirect the group's attention.
Good.
Also ensuring that no one person dominates the group all the time. And that means asking the people who have been silent, do you have anything you want to add? Is there anything you want to share? Deliberately doing that when there's a little bit of a time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let me add one that I know if Michael were here, he would certainly echo this. And I absolutely agree with you, Ken, that it's important to give people permission to pass on a question. Silence can be really healthy and important. If it's only silence and you've got someone who basically just won't enter in with any substance ever, that starts feeling unsafe pretty quickly. Because, I'm airing out some of the most embarrassing, painful things in my history. And he is, but then this guy's just looking at us and it's just shallow. I have found that in my groups, and not with every group, but at times to be one of the bigger challenges. You have someone like that, that can definitely not feel safe. Have you guys experienced that? And if so, what did you do about it?
I haven't experienced that consistently. I've wondered, particularly, about men, but usually when I ask them, the response is, I'm just trying to process all of this right now. They've gotten quiet because they're just got a lot on their minds, and it hasn't been like that every week. It'll be like that a week or 2 weeks, and then they share their story or something, and they've been very, very participatory, very vulnerable. So fortunately, I haven't had that.
Good. I haven't had it with every group of my 4, just once or twice. And it's kind of fresh in my mind because I met with a veteran facilitator yesterday, and he had it very recently, and it was really hurting the group. Others were telling him that. So he called the guy up and processed, and between the 2 of them, they decided that guy just wasn't ready for a group. And it was a healthy conversation, but he just basically didn't think I think maybe he didn't really think he needed it. And maybe he didn't. So it's important to not be afraid of having hard conversations in between groups when things come up.
Right.
Yeah, Ken?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I was wondering when you were talking about this, is if you have someone who's consistently like this session after session and not doing anything but shallow, I think it's a fair question to ask, is this really the right place for you right now? Maybe maybe this isn't the right place for you.
Exactly. It's a very non-judgmental.
Yeah, and say, we'd love to have you back some other time when you're ready.
Right.
But it just seems like this isn't a good fit right now.
Yeah.
But I haven't had anyone that I've had to do that to actually myself, but I wondered, how that would work and what you would have to do about it.
Yeah. Well, this guy handled it really well. I heard that from others. I suspect some here, and we're going to record this, so others who aren't on the meeting today can access this. And no doubt there'll be some, probably several, who haven't facilitated a group. And so that's part of why they wanted to be in on this webinar. What would you 2 say by way of just a couple points of wisdom for a guy that hasn't facilitated a group yet, feels like God maybe asking him to do that. He's a little nervous about it. Well, you know, 1 or 2 points of wisdom to say, you know, here are some of the most important things I've learned that I think if you keep this in mind, it's going to really help you have a successful group. Maybe some things that we haven't really gone into yet.
Yeah, I
Either of
think
you.
the idea of just going through the material and doing the work yourself is really good. Ken mentioned that we co-led a group, but that was my first time going. I had been through the vulnerable children material. I'd been through some other training regarding trafficked individuals, but I hadn't been through mending the soul. So it was very helpful for me to have Ken there. He essentially acted as the leader for much of that group, because I was getting blindsided by things that we were going through when I came into it and thinking I didn't have much work to do. So just making sure you do the work ahead of time and have that foundation, that support. I went through those things, and through some counseling, and it was actually my wife finally said, "Okay, now you got the thumbs up. You can go facilitate a group." So
Yeah.
I'm ready to go run off and do anything, and she's kind of my throttle a lot of times.
Yeah.
Good to have feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doing the materials, like I mentioned, up ahead of time at the beginning of the group is really good. Making sure you have the forums and that type of thing is done. Know that it's always a challenge. It's a spiritual warfare that you enter. So you can have 6 guys that are just excited over the top to do a group, and then you try to pull it together, and it's just, expect the spiritual warfare to kick in. It's just going to be difficult. When it does happen, it's going to be beautiful, but there's a time in there where it's just pulling teeth to try to make it happen.
Yeah.
And I think we already mentioned just keeping it safe and praying for the guys that are in your group. I think there's just insight and effectiveness in that.
Yeah.
Power in that.
Good wisdom.
Yeah.
Ken?
Yeah. I think I've found it's really not about me, but about what God is doing in the group. I think that's the biggest thing of going perception, because I know that I'm weak and I have stuff that I'm still dealing with, and my preparation's not always the best. But it's going in with that view of God. Here I am, use me.
Yeah.
I can't make anything happen. I can't fix those guys. You can, and I'm there just to be the person that facilitates your work in these guys' lives. So it's going in with that attitude of, and that relates to the soul modesty we were talking about at the beginning too. That it's God's work.
That's healthy.
Yeah,
soul modesty.
it's very healthy. Yeah, and another thing is to relax. It's easy to get stressed about and worry about the group, but because God is doing the work, we don't need to be anxious about it. We don't need to fix anything, because God will, and He'll do it in an amazing way. And recognize that God's only got broken people to be facilitators. So you're in good company, and you have the right qualifications. And above all, know that God cares for you as you do the facilitation, and He cares for them. It's just vital to know that those are the sorts of things. You're bringing your brokenness to God and asking Him to use it. it's just vital to be aware of that and going in knowing I'm the channel for God to do something in this group.
Yeah, that's rich, Ken. Thank you. I think of Paul's statement, I think in 2 Corinthians 3, where Paul, the great missionary, apostle, theologian, says, not that we consider anything is coming from ourselves. In other words, we're not adequate in ourselves. And then he says, our adequacy comes from God.
Absolutely.
And if we keep that in mind, it's very freeing. No, I can't change anyone. God can. I can be a channel. And obviously it means we keep working on our stuff before the Lord. What has been maybe one of the most kind of encouraging surprises to you in facilitating men's groups? Something you weren't expecting that was really encouraging. And we've talked about some of the challenges, and they're real, but on the other side, you both, I know because I've spoken to you, really enjoy very much doing men's groups. So what's been something maybe even beyond what you were expecting that's been delightful?
I think for me, the surprising thing is you take a group of busy men, 5 or 6 guys, and ask them to commit to 10, 11, 12 weeks, and they show up week after week and engage. It's where else do we have that kind of engagement with men? It's very pleasantly surprising that they show up and they engage week after week, and that it's just, it never gets old being just in the front seat, seeing the changes in their lives.
Yeah. And no two groups are ever the same, are they?
No.
Yeah, even for the facilitator.
Yeah.
At least my experience is God teaches me new things.
Yeah.
Another couple of layers of the onion get peeled off, some new insights that for myself, insights from others. Ken, what would you say for you has been one of the most delightful surprises?
Yeah, I think I was somewhat surprised at how relational the men really are, how much they share and bond with each other, and it was just like, oh yeah, if we're going to be a bunch of guys, talking quietly and calmly and stuff, but no, this is really deep stuff, and they're hungry for a place to talk about, and that kind of surprised me, and it delighted me, because it's like this is where God is doing the work. That was a surprise, and now that I've facilitated several groups, I see what's going on, and yeah.
Good. I want to take some questions, but I want to give you guys one last question. It's unless there's anything else you want to add, and that would be kind of a final piece of wisdom. If we forget everything else, don't forget this. This is absolutely core essential to being a successful facilitator. What would that be? And you may want to chew, if you need to chew on that a minute, that's fine.
Yeah, what comes to mind is just that it's God's work. I think, Ken, you were talking about that a little bit. It's God's work, and we're just the facilitators. We're not leaders, we're not instructors, we're just facilitating the space for God to do the work. And yeah,
I would say it's your availability that's the biggest thing that you're giving those men. Because it's God, we have a great God, a God who will do all the work. And for us, in some ways, we just need to show up with the view of God is going to use this and use me.
That's great. You guys have a lot of wisdom. Well, let me open it up for questions. And then there were a couple we didn't totally get to that I can come back to, but I'd like to open it up to the rest of you. Make sure that you unmute yourself if there's a red line through your microphone. What questions or even comments do you guys have?
I'll ask one.
Sure.
What does follow-up look like for you guys, for Ken and Scott?
That's a very good question. I will pick that one up if you don't mind, because I've been wondering exactly the same thing myself. And so that's after the last group, which ended early in this year, we asked the guys, do you want to keep meeting? And they said yes. So we are meeting once a month. And I know that's you know, that's one of the things I'm trying out. And I'm seeing God still working in their lives, and it's great to share and to be part of that. I mean, it's not necessarily always possible, but talking to individuals as well, I've started, you know, picking up with some of the other individuals. And there's only a certain amount that you can do because you're starting new groups and things like that. But that's a couple of things I've tried, is just meeting with a few of the guys afterwards, one-on-one. And then this I'm just trying now is doing it once a month or maybe once every 2 months, and continuing to process the material with no specific agenda.
One thing that we did, and I love that idea of a once a month, you can pull that off. And this, I haven't done this every time, but my pastors really wanted to do it. And that is a couple weeks after we finished, we did a dinner and our wives came. And just, it was kind of free flowing, but just shared some things together because obviously our wives weren't there for the group meetings. And that was great. I think it helped the wives kind of feel a little more a part of it. And there was a good sense of, not final, because we did stay in touch for quite a while, but it was a healthy kind of wrap up. That's a simple thing that we did.
Good.
Okay, good question. What other questions do you guys have?
I'll ask another one.
Go for it.
For the person that is slowly fading away, how much do you pursue them? Ken or Scott?
What do you clarify for us, Mark?
Well, they're
fading away,
not engaging more. They're off and on. Their attendance is late. They're gotta leave early.
Okay.
Always something.
Yeah. Good problem solving question.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a lot of insight because we haven't had to deal with that. I've had people who have pushed the limits, like I'm gonna have to miss 2 of the sessions, and it's like, oh, well, I really want them to be involved, so but they've stuck to that. You know, they've only missed a couple of the sessions, and they've been at the rest. So I know that I would just want to contact them offline and just try to get whatever it is out, because there's got to be something. It's engaging material, and so whether, you know, we don't want it to fade off. You know, that's not going to be good for any of the groups. So we want to just jump in and connect with that person. You know, it sounds like one-on-one would be the best, and see what's going on there, and either make a breakthrough, or perhaps just ask them or suggest that it might not be the right time for them to continue if they're not ready.
Yeah, I haven't had that experience. Sorry, go on.
Just to clarify, Scott, it sounds like you're pretty clear on the front end when men sign up what the expectations are, including regular attendance,
Right.
etc.
Right.
That's important.
Yeah, the same. The prevention is in the screening process in the interview, where, you know, when you talk to the guys, you make it clear to them this is going to take, you know, a very minimum of about 6 hours a week of both in the between the meetings and the book, and maybe up to 10 to 12 hours a week, depending on how much you invest into it. And if this isn't a period in your life when you can do this, then it's probably not a good fit. So this is a kind of upfront, and also just assessing, you know, how enthusiastic are they about the group at the beginning. But during it, I would say the same as you, Scott. It's like fish or cut bait. You know, if it's really not working out, and it feels like it's too deep for you, but you're not sure you want to quit the group, to say it's okay. It's okay to find out that this is not the right thing and say, yeah, it's not the right time for me. And there's no shame in that, and there's no judgment in that. It's just, you know, this just wasn't the right time for me to do this group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that kind of leads into my question, and I've done 2 groups after participating in one myself, and the last group we started with 5, ended up with 2, and when the coronavirus caused us to stop when we were in the middle of chapter 5, which is a tough chapter.
Yeah.
And it was very difficult. There was only one that would even communicate back with me. And so for me, I was wanting to go back to the interview process. And I think that we need to set some kind of standard and say, I mean, we've told, in interviews, we've told 2 people that we didn't think it was a good time for them, one for medication, and one had only been clean from drug addiction for 8 weeks, and had only been dry for 8 weeks, and we just didn't, we felt that Celebrate Recovery was a better option at this point.
Yeah.
And so, but I still, there was other challenges, and I feel like we should have, as hard as that would have been, if you've got a man reaching out that wants help, to say, I don't think you're ready at this point. And I think it's hard to do. And, you know, we really need to figure out a good process for that, and be able to do that. Screen them closer. And so you guys struggle with that at all? Or, I mean, there was guys that, you know, you hate to just leave them, and then you don't know what they're dealing with in the middle of a chapter like, chapter 5, and you try to keep in touch with them, and they don't respond.
What do you think, guys?
I have had more of the situation where, so I've been very clear, you know, talking about upfront, saying it's a big time commitment, it's a long time commitment, and you really go through your stuff, and you know, it's difficult. It's the deepest thing that you'll probably ever do. So I try to be really clear about that up front. And so what I've seen is I've scared people away, basically. You know, they're just not ready to go and to do it. So I've had that situation more than the situation where someone isn't ready.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
Ken, you wanna
I've
add
had a couple of people, I think, who really couldn't get a schedule together to actually consistently do it. So that's particularly with men who are working a lot and they can't find a consistent time.
Yeah.
I just believe that God brings the people to you that really need to be there. And like Scott to say, this is going to be really hard, and also needing to have some stability in their lives, to like stable, a degree of stability in their home situation, in their employment situation.
Right.
If their life is chaotic, they just won't be able to get down to that because all of the other things are far more immediate.
Yeah. Very good point.
And we did go through those things and thought, we almost felt like we were being too, like you said, like Scott said, pushing people away at some point possibly, and wanted to be there to help. But I think we've learned from, especially this last group, that we have to be more choosy, and we don't. It's in their best interest that we are.
Right.
I think.
Yeah.
It is, but at the same time, sometimes you use your best judgment, try to listen to the Spirit, but it's a subjective process, and things can change. They may have, some of their circumstances may have changed, so maybe all the data you had on the front end would have made them a good candidate, but some things could have changed. And yeah. One thing I want you guys to know on the Mending the Soul side, hopefully you're aware of this, but maybe not. We have some new curriculum called Discover. It's available on our website. It's free, and it's like the starter. People have described the Mending the Soul workbook for men and women as a healing superhighway, but you got to drive 90 miles an hour. I mean, it's full bore, no holds barred. Discover is kind of the 5 mile an hour on ramp. So it's slow and easy, and it's a nice alternative for someone that they're just, you sense they're not ready for the deep dive. But it's, instead of just saying, well, now's not the time, and then you can't offer anything, it's a starter. And then we're in the process of a 6-week curriculum. Celesta's working on it right now. She's almost done with the first draft, and then we're going to do some 10-minute videos that'll go with it. So just 6 lessons. Discover is self-paced, and you can do it with other people, but it's probably most people will do it just individually. And we all know that's not you're not going to have deep healing if it's just individual, but it's a start. Explore is designed for small group, but it's just much shorter lessons, only 6 lessons, and it would be ideal curriculum. It should be available about the end of the calendar year. So I just want you to be aware of that as an alternative. You screen, you just decide in the screening they're not ready for the deep dive. You'll have 2 other alternative curriculums that you could point them toward.
Yeah, I'd heard about Discover, and I'm in the process of going through that, but that was one of the things I was going to suggest is that something that we could make as a prerequisite to being part of the group.
I'll pass that on. We hadn't even talked about that. I mean, it would certainly be your prerogative to do that. Yeah.
It might be helpful.
It would certainly get the ball rolling, if you will. It's just, yeah, it's very light, very simple, non-threatening, more open-ended questions. The team that wrote it, some of our other staff people felt just so that to get as many people on the highway as possible, wouldn't include a whole lot of scripture. We're not ashamed of scripture, but this is a starting point. So just super, super basic with the broadest application. Get them started, and then hopefully they go from there. So yeah, that could be a way to kind of get people prepared and see if they're ready.
I was thinking it might give them a little skin in the game, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. And it's, it's free, it's downloadable. So, it's simple and it's self-paced. So it's not a high bar, but it is an investment. Make a little investment, and yeah, I think that could be real helpful. Well, it looks like our time is up. I thank you, men, for joining us. Thank you, Ken and Scott, for sharing your wisdom with us. Man, I pray often, regularly, very regularly for our facilitators. I love it that we have literally hundreds, and I don't have any idea a fraction of what's going on, and I love that. But know that you are prayed for, and always welcome your ideas. If there are particular trainings that we haven't done that you'd like to see us do, shoot those ideas to us. We're going to be adding more and more webinars as we go. We just hired a woman, Leslie, who is going to be kind of overseeing our facilitator care, and that will largely be just beefing up some of our online trainings so they're all automated. People can jump in, don't have to wait, but also doing more webinars. So do share your ideas with us. Well, let me close, and I just want to ask the Lord to bless you guys. Thank you for your investment. Lord, thank you for our time together. Thank you for each of these men. Lord, bless them, guide them. Just continue to help all of us grow in health, continue to heal our wounds, so that we would be better and better equipped to help others in this healing journey. Guide each of these men and just applying these principles to be as healthy and effective a facilitator as possible. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, guys.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Thanks for your time.